Hello, I will continue to talk about the rules of chess. First of all, I will start with the progress of the game. The player with the white tools is the first to play. Each player in turn moves one of the tools in his possession, only one tool except in the case of castling. As I already told you, in case of castling, actually you move two tools at the same time and it considered as one move only. You move the king 2 squares towards the rook, and then you move the rook before the king. This is the small castling, and in the big castling you move the king 2 squares towards the rook, and then you move the rook before the king. So that is the only move in chess that you move two pieces and it considered as one move. Okay? Each tool has its own unique way of moving, as I mentioned in the previous lesson. And so on until a decision is made. The player can move any piece in turn and move it wherever he wants, provided that it doesn't violate the rules for moving the pieces. Also, if a certain player's king is exposed to a threat from an opponent's piece, a situation known as check, the player must do everything in his power to eliminate this situation. For example, in this position, the black bishop threatens check on the white king, so the white must eliminate the threat of check immediately. If he fails to eliminate the threat, he will lose the game in a state known as checkmate. Okay? Any move that doesn't result in this immediately will be illegal. So, in this situation, the black bishop threatens a check on the white king. So, if, for example, in this position the white plays h2 to h4, it will be an illegal move. Why? Because when your king is in a threat of check, you must react to the threat of check immediately. You must not do any other move. Okay, so this is an illegal move, and the white must eliminate the threat of check. So, for example, you can move the queen to a square that it is not threatened by the opponent's tool. You can move the king to g3. In addition to this, any move that would immediately result in the playing player's king being in check is illegal. So the king is the only piece that must not be deliberately placed under threat by another piece. I'll explain what I mean. In this position, the black bishop threatens check on the white king. Or maybe I will change the position a little bit. Suppose we, in this position, the black bishop from c6 threatens a check on the white king. So the white must eliminate the check immediately. But he must not move to the square g5, because in g5 he will be threatened by the other bishop. Okay, maybe I will change the position because we have two bishops in the same color. That is not something that it is usually never occurs. So I will change the position to that. In this position, actually, we have two bishops in different colors. Okay, and the bishop on b6 is threatens check on the white king. In this position, the white king is not allowed to go to the square f3. Why? Because in the square f3 is threatened by the other bishop, and he also is not allowed to go to the square e4 for the same reason, because in the square e4 is threatened by the other bishop on c6. So it is not allowed to move your king to a square that it will be threatened by the opponent's tool. Okay? Now I will explain the rules of beating. If one of the opponent's pieces stands in the way of the moving piece, he can eat it, provided it is a legal move. So I will show you an example for eating or beating. In this position, if it is black's move, then the black, as I have already told you, the bishop moves diagonally in its color. The white bishop moves diagonally on the white squares, and the black bishops moves diagonally in the black squares. So if it is black's turn, the black can eat the pawn on g2. Why? Because on the way of its moving there is an opponent's tool. In this case it can eat the pawn on g2. Okay? And he also has another option. He can eat also the pawn f2 by the other bishops. By the other bishops that moves on the black squares diagonally. Okay? In chess, unlike in checkers, for example, eating is a right and not an obligation. By eating another tool, it means removing it from the board and placing the eating tool in its place. Okay, as I have already showed you, the black bishop on b6 can eat the pawn on f2. The meaning of eating is you actually remove the pawn from the board and place the eating tool, the bishop, on its place, on the pawn's place. Okay, the same thing is right for the other bishop. That is the way of eating. Okay, the king cannot be eaten. As I have already told you, when you threaten your opponent's king, you declare a check. And your opponent must eliminate the threat of check immediately. It is customary to declare in a situation where the king is exposed to a threat of check and cannot be defended, for checkmate. Some shorten it to mate. Okay, so if you threaten your opponent's king by one of your tools in check, and your opponent cannot eliminate the threat of check, then actually you did a checkmate or mate on your opponent and you won the game. all tools eat according to their movement. For example, as I showed you, the bishop will only eat on its diagonal. Here the bishop, the black bishop that moves on the white squares eat diagonally on the white squares, and the black bishops that moves on the black squares eat diagonally on the black squares. So if on the black squares there is an opponent's tool, he can eat it. The same thing is true about, for example, the rook. The rook eats as the way he moves. The rook moves straight, or if we, for example, if the rook is on the row 4, it can move to any square on row 4, and also it can move to any square on column E. Okay, so in this position, if it is black's turn, the rook can eat the pawn h2. So the rook actually will remove the pawn from the board, and we place the rook on the pawn's place. Okay, so the rook eats the way it's moved. Okay, and another example is for the knight. The knight also eats the way it's moved. In this position, the black knight can move to the square h2, and because there is an opponent's tool on the square h2, he can eat that tool. Okay, the same thing is correct for the square f2. The black knight can move to the square f2, so he can eat the opponent's tool on that square. Okay, and also I will show you the way of the eating of the queen. The queen, as I have already showed you in the previous lecture, can move diagonally, and also it can move straight. So it is the combination of the movement of the rook and the bishop. So from in this position, for example, the queen can eat the pawn e2. Why? Because the queen can move diagonally, and that's the reason that he can eat diagonally on its way of moving. Okay, another option is that the queen can eat also the pawn at a2 because he moves also straight, so can eat the pawn like this. Okay, and another example is in this position. If, for example, it is knight's turn and it is white's turn, and the white eats the pawn on f7, then the black king can eat that knight like this. Why? Because the king can move one square to any direction. So it is in the way of its moving, so can eat the white knight. So usually a tool is exactly in the same way it moves. So if in the way of its moving there is an opponent's tool, it can eat that tool, as I have already showed you. So that is the rule for eating pieces. But we have one exception. Except for the pawn which moves forward but eats diagonally. So the exception is the pawn. The pawn moves forward and eats diagonally. As I have already showed you in the first lecture, the pawn moves forward, yes, he moves forward, but he eats diagonally. So the white pawn can eat the black pawn like this. And then the black can eat the white pawn diagonally. Okay, so the pawn moves forward, and if the pawn only one square, yes, the pawn moves forward only one square. But if the pawn is in its beginning position, that is to say in the second row for the white or in the seventh row for the black, then the pawn can move two squares forward. Okay, the same rule for the black. From the seventh row we can move two squares forward. Okay, so Usually the pawn moves forward only one square, except uh, in the case that is in the second row for the white, or on the seventh row for the black, that the pawn can move two squares forward. Yes, like this, or like this. But the pawn eats diagonally. He eats diagonally like this. Okay? A special case of beating is beating through its movement, or en passant rule. I've already talked about it in the first lecture. I will repeat on the en passant rule quickly, and later I will talk in detail about that rule. If the white moves its pawn two squares forward, and there is an adjacent pawn in the row that he moved the pawn, then the black can eat the white pawn like this. Okay, I will talk about it later in detail. Okay, now I will talk about the stages of the game. Okay. Actually, we have three stages in the game of chess. The first stage of the game is the opening. At this stage, the player develops his tools, which are blocked behind the row of pawns. Yes, the tools are blocked behind the row of pawns. In order to allow them to control the center of the board and threaten the opponent's defense. The opening phase also includes the evacuation of one of the sides in order to allow the castling. So we will take out the knight and the bishop in order to do the castling, and also we have other option to do the big castling after we evacuate the queen, the bishop and the knight from the first row. The same thing is correct for the black side. The castling aims to fortify the king in a corner and keep him away from the exposed center. Okay, we do the castling in order to defend our king and also in order to develop the rook that is in the corner. We want to move the rook to more center square. So we defend the king by keeping him away from the exposed center. A typical opening usually involves a double jump with the king or the queen's pawn. So the king's pawn is the pawn that before the king, and the queen's pawn is the pawn before the queen. So a typical opening is involved in a development of the king's pawn or queen's pawn, something like that. The black can react in the same way. Taking out one or two knights, then the white can take out his knight, the black can do similar thing, and then take out one of the bishops, something like that. The black side can do similar thing, and then the white can do the small castling, and then the black can take out his knight, the white can advance his pawn in order to open the way for the bishop, c1, and then the black can also do the castling. And so on. There are openings called gambits, in which one of the sides sacrifice material, usually pawn, in order to take control of the center. So I will show you what is gambit, or I will show you what is an example of Queen's Gambit. If the white opens starts with d2 to d4, and then the black side reacts in the same way, then the white can sacrifice a pawn by moving pawn c2 to c4, and it is now black's option either to take the pawn or to continue to develop his tools. If the black takes the pawn, then the white can react by doing this move e2, pawn e2 to e4, and by doing this move actually it controls the center of the board. So you can say that the white side sacrificed a pawn in order to take control of the board, controls the squares c5, d5, e5 and f5. So in order to prevent from the white the control, to gain control on the board, the black side can have the option not to take the pawn c4 and continue to develop his tools. So in this position you can say that there is more or less the white and the black has the same control in the center of the board. And if the if the black takes the pawn that the white sacrificed, the opening is called Queen's Gambit accepted. Why accepted? Because actually the black accepts the pawn that the white actually sacrificed. Okay. The number of openings is large and the number of their variants is even larger. Professional players memorize many openings in order not to make mistakes at the beginning of the game, which will give an early advantage to the opponent. Okay, so we finished to talk about the first stage of the game, the opening. Now we'll talk about the second stage. The second phase is the middle game. Took place after most of the tools had already been developed and the battle is as its most intense in the center of the board. Usually while exchanging tools and trying to break the other side's pawn's alignment. At this stage, it is possible to implement a large number of tactics to accumulate a material and positional advantage. There is a lot of tactics in the middle game, and I will not talk about that tactics in this lecture. Okay, the third stage is the end game. And this stage happens when a large number of tools exchanges have been made without a decisive advantage being gained for any side. This stage usually includes a small number of pieces for each side. A king, a knight or bishop or rook, and the number of pawns. Okay, so in the end game you have actually a small number of few pieces on the board, and in which the players try to overwhelm each other, usually by crowning one of the pawns to a heavy piece, such a queen. For example, this is an example for endgame. In this position, the white will try to advance his pawn on e2 to the 8th row in order to replace it to a queen. Okay, because when you arrive with your pawn to the 8th row, you can replace it to any other tool except for the king. So the white side will try to advance his pawn with the support of his king to the 8th row. And at that point, the threat in checkmate to the king is small, and therefore the king becomes an active tool. The king also becomes an active tool that protects the pawns and supports their progress towards the 8th row. So in this position, as I already told you, the king will support his pawn and advance the pawn in order to arrive to the 8th row and to replace the pawn to a queen, to do the process of crowning. At that point, the threat in checkmate to the king is small, and therefore the king becomes an active tool, protecting the pawns and supporting their progress towards the 8th row. Because the endgame requires precise play, many players carefully study common endgame positions. Okay, so we finished to talk about the stages of the game, the 3 stages of the game. Now I will talk about special moves and situations in the game. I will start with the en passant rule. when a pawn makes a 2 steps advance from its starting point, yes, 2 steps advance, and there is an opponent's pawn on the square next to the destination square on an adjacent file. So you can see that in this position that there is an adjacent pawn on square e4. Then the opponent's pawn can capture it in passing, like that. Moving to the square the pawn passed over. Okay? So, if in this position, for example, if the white side moves its pawn 2 squares forward, then the pawn that is adjacent to the pawn that moved can hit the pawn that moved 2 squares like that. Okay? Or if the white side moves its pawns 2 squares, then the black, the adjacent pawn that is the same row, can hit the pawn like that. Okay? This can be done only on the turn immediately following the opponent's pawn 2 squares advance. So if the white pawn moves 2 squares forward, then the black has the right to hit the pawn like that. But this right is only immediately after the movement of 2 squares of the pawn. Then the black can hit that pawn according to en passant rule, can hit the pawn immediately. Otherwise, the right to do so is forfeited. So, if, for example, the black does another move, like moving his king, for example, then he forfeited on his right to hit the white pawn that advanced 2 squares. He can no more hit the pawn according to en passant rule. So the rule, the en passant rule, you can do it only immediately after the movement of the pawn 2 squares. Only after the pawn moved 2 squares, only then you can hit the pawn immediately according to en passant rule. Otherwise, you will lose your right to hit the white pawn according to en passant rule. Okay? The same thing, of course, is correct for the white. The white side has the same right exactly as the black. If the black pawn moves 2 squares forward, then the white has his right to hit the pawn like that, according to Al-Basant rule. But he must do it immediately after the black pawn moved 2 squares forward. Otherwise he will lose the right to hit the pawn according to Al-Basant rule. Okay? So we finished to talk about the Al-Basant rule, and the next special move in chess is the castling. In the game of chess, the castling is a joint move of the king and the rook that is considered as one move and is carried out in 2 stages. The first stage, if it is now white's move, you can do the small castling in 2 stages. I will explain you the small castling, how to do it. The king moves 2 squares towards the rook. This is the first stage, and the second stage is that the rook is moved 1 square after its king. This is the small castling. So you moved 2 pieces, the king and the rook, and it considered as one move that called castling. The same rule is for the big castling. In the queen side, the king moves 2 squares towards the white rook, and then in the first stage the rook moves before its king, or after its king, as you can say it as you wish. Okay, so this is the big castling, and this is the small castling. Okay, there are 5 conditions that must be met in order to perform a castling. So in order to perform a castling, 5 conditions must be met. The first condition is that the king and the rook, the participant tools, didn't move at all from their starting point. Okay? If the rook h1 moved during the game, and for example, if the rook moved to h3 and then came back to h1, then you are not allowed to do small castling. Why? Because the rook moved, the rook on h1 moved. But you can do the big castling. The same thing is about the rook a1. If the rook a1 moved during the game, for example, from a1 to a3 and then came back to a1, then you are not allowed to do anymore the big castling, but you can do the small castling. But if the king moved during the game, for example, the king moved to f1 and then it came back to its starting point, that is e1, then in this position it is impossible to make neither a big castling nor a small castling. Okay, so if your king moved during the game, you lose your right to do castling you are not allowed to do neither a big castling nor a small castling. Okay, so that is the first condition to do castling. First condition that must be met in order to do castling. The second condition that must be met in order to do the castling is that the king is not in a chess threat at that moment. For example, in this position, the king is in a check position, in a check threat by the black bishop on g3. So in this position, you are not allowed to do castling at all. Neither a big castling nor a small castling. When your king is at a chess position, you are not allowed to do castling at all. So that is the second condition that must be met in order to do the castling. The third condition is that the king will not be found in the threat of chess at the end of castling. For example, in this position, if theoretically the white side reduce in this position, if the white side do the small castling, then the white king will be in a check position, so it is not allowed. That is the third condition. If your king will be in a chess position after the castling, you are not allowed to do the castling. So the white is not allowed to do the small castling because he will be in a chess position after the castling. But he can do the big castling. Okay? The the fourth condition that must be met in order to do castling is that the king doesn't move past a square threatened by the opponent's piece. So for example, in this position, if it is white's terrain and he does the small castling, then he must pass for the square f1 that is threatened by the black rook. So you are not allowed to pass for a square that is threatened by your opponent's tool. So that is the reason that the white is not allowed to do the small castling, because he must pass for a square that is threatened by the black bishop. The square f1 is threatened by the black bishop. So when you must pass for a square that is threatened by your opponent's tool, then you are not allowed to do the castling. So the white is not allowed to do the small castling, but he can do the big castling. So the king doesn't move past a square threatened by the opponent's piece. Okay, that is the first condition. The fourth condition that must be met in order to do the castling. And the fifth condition that must be met in order to do the castling is that there are no tools that separate the king from the rook. In this position, for example, the white is not allowed to do the small castling. Why? Because there is a knight that separates between the king and the rook. Okay, but he can do the big castling. Okay, and in this situation, for example, it is impossible to make neither a big castling nor a small castling. You are not allowed to do the big castling because there is a white bishop that separates between the king and the rook on a1. And you are not allowed to do the small castling because of the knight. Okay? So those are the 5 conditions that must be met in order to do the castling. Okay? If only one of the rooks has been moved, it is still possible for the other rook to be used for castling. I've already showed you that if, for example, the rook h1 moves during the game and then comes back to the rook to the square h1, we are not allowed to do the small castling because the rook is already moved, but you can do the big castling. If the square adjacent to the rook is threatened, it is not possible to make a small castling according to condition 3 that the king will not be found in the threat of chess at the end of the castling. So if the square g1 is threatened by the black bishop, you are not allowed to do the small castling according to condition number 3. But you can actually, in this position, you are not allowed to do also the big castling. Why? Because after the big castling, your king will be found in a check position. So in this position, you are not allowed to do castling at all, neither a big castling nor a small castling. Even if the rook itself is threatened and the conditions mentioned above are met, it is allowed to castle. For example, in this position, the white rook on h1 is threatened by the black bishop on f3. Yes? Even though that the white rook is threatened, you can do the small castling. It is no problem when your rook is threatened by any tool before the castling. The problem is only with the king. If the king is threatened in check, you are not allowed to do castling at all. But if the rook is threatened by any tool before the castling, you can do the small castling. Can do the castling provided that all the 5 conditions are met. So in this position you can do the small castling, but you cannot do the big castling because the square d1 is threatened by the black bishop. And when the king must pass through a square that is threatened by your opponent's tool, you are not allowed to do the castling, according to condition number 4. And in this position, for example, you can see that the black rook is threatened to eat the white rook on a1, but as I have already told you, there is no problem when your rook is threatened before the castling. You can do the big castling, even though that your rook is threatened before the castling. Okay, but in this position, you are not allowed to do the small castling because after the small castling, your king will be in a check position. So you cannot do the small castling, but you can do the big castling. Okay? According to the rules of the game, to make a castling, the king must be moved first, and then the rook must be moved. Okay? If it is white's terrain and you want to do the castling, you must first of all touch the king and move it 2 squares towards the king, and only then you will move the rook after the king. The same thing applies for the big castling. First of all, you must touch the king and move it 2 squares towards the rook, and then you will move the rook after the king, like this. Okay? But taking the rook before moving the king means a move where only the rook moves. So if you touch the rook h1, you are not allowed to do castling at all. Why? Because if you want, so you must move your rook only without castling. Okay? As I already told you, if you want to do castling, you must first of all touch the king and move it, and only then you will move the rook. If you want to do the opposite thing, then you are not allowed to do castling at all. When you touch the rook on h1, you must move with a rook to any square that is allowed according to the movement of the rook to this square. So the same thing is for the other rook. If you touch the rook, you must move the rook without castling at all. Okay, the castling is an important move in the early stages of the game because it serves two important purposes. As I already told you, it moves the king to a more protected place than the center of the board where the battle started. Yes, for example, the big castling moves the queen to a more protected place. That is the second purpose, and the first purpose, and the second purpose is that it takes the rook out of the corner and into a better attacking position in the center of the board. So after the big castling, as you can see, the rook controls on column E, that is the center of the board. The same thing is if you do the small castling, the rook controls the column F that is very close to the center of the board. So you do castling in order to protect the king and in order to move the rook to the center of the board, or in order to move the rook to a place that it controls the center of the board, or column that very close to the center of the board. Okay, so we finished to talk about castling. And the next thing that I will talk about is the decision. Check refers to the situation when one of the players attacks his opponent's king. That is, the king stands in a situation where in the next move it will be taken if no action is taken. Okay? For example, in this position, the black bishop threatens check on the white king, and theoretically, if the white does an illegal move like this, then theoretically the black can eat the king. That is the meaning of check. The meaning of check is that the king is threatened to be taken in the next move if no action is taken. In a check position, the attacked king side must cause the check position to stop in any possible way. For example, in this position, it is white's turn because the black threatens check on the white king. The black bishop threatens check on the white king. The first possibility is you can eliminate the check by eating the attacking piece. So the white can eat the attacking piece like this. This is the first possibility to eliminate the check position, and it is a legal move. Whether by blocking the path of the attack. The second option that the white has in a chess position, this chess position, is to block the line of the attack or the path of the attack by doing pawn f2 to f3. By moving the pawn f2 to f3, you actually blocked, the white blocked the line of the attack. The diagonal, the main diagonal is from h1 to a8. That is the line of the attack. The white blocked the main diagonal, the line of the attack. So that is the second option that the white has. And the third option is moving the king. So in this position, he can move the king to g3, can move the king to h3, or he can move the king to h2, or he can move the king to g1, or he can move the king to f1. So, when you are threatened by check, you have three options. The first option is to eat the threatening tool. The second option is to block the threatening path or the threatening line. And the third option is to move the king to a square that it is not threatened. but it must not be moved to the square that is being attacked. For example, in this option, the black threatens check on the white king. The white cannot move his king to the square h3 because in h3 the black made a mistake. In this position, the white cannot move his king to the square h3 because in h3 the king is threatened by the black queen. The black queen that is on c8. So you are not allowed to move your king to a square that is being attacked by your opponent's tool. Okay? If none of these actions are possible, the situation is called checkmate. A situation in which the king cannot defend himself at all. So, if you cannot eat the threatening tool and you cannot block the line of the attack and you also cannot move the king to a square that is not being attacked by your opponent's tool, then your opponents win the game. Your opponents made a checkmate. And this is a situation in which the king cannot defend himself at all, and so your opponents won the game. So checkmate occurs when one, there is a threat to the king, like this position. It must be a threat to the king. I will explain you why. For example, in the end game, in this position, there is no threat to the white king. The white king is not attacked in check, and if it is white's terrain, then it is a stalemate position or a draw position. Why? Because there is no threat to the white king. When there is no threat to the white king and the white king can do nothing, cannot escape the king to a square that is not being threatened, then it will be a stalemate and then draw. The white cannot go to f1 because of the pawn. He cannot go to e1 for the same reason, because of the pawn. And he cannot go to f2 because of the king, and he cannot go to d2 because of the king. And that is the so if your opponents, if the black is not if you're in a position that your opponent has no square to go with your king, and there is no move that he can do. There is no legal move that he can do, and you are not threatening his king. This is a position of stalemate. Like this position, because of the fact that the white king has no square to go, and he is not threatened by your tool in a check. That is the reason that it is a stalemate. Why? Because it is condition one that there is a threat to the king. If there is no threat to the king, then you are not the winner of the game. Okay? So in order to do checkmate, you must threaten your opponent's king. Otherwise, it is not mate. Like this position, it will be a draw if your opponent's king cannot square to go to. Okay, so that is the first condition that must be met in order to make checkmate on your opponent's king. There is a threat to the king. There is a threat to your opponent's king. Otherwise, it is not a checkmate. You are not the winner of the game if you are not threatening your opponent's king. Like this position, that is a stalemate. If it is white's turn, it is a stalemate, a draw. The second condition that must be met in order to do a checkmate is that the king cannot escape to any place that is not under threat. Well, for example, this is a checkmate position. Why? Because there is a threat of check, and the king cannot escape to any place that is not under threat. He cannot escape to G1 because then in G1 he is also under the threat of the black queen. The same thing is for E1, is under the threat of the queen. And also in G2 and F2 is under the threat of the queen. So this is a checkmate position. And the third condition that must be met in order to perform a checkmate is that there is no tool that can protect the king. So in this position, the pawns cannot protect the king, so it is a checkmate position. The white checkmated, the black checkmated the white and won the game. The black won the game. Okay, all three conditions must be met in order to do checkmate. All three conditions. There is a threat to the king, first condition. The second condition, the king cannot escape to any place that it is not under threat. And the third condition, there is no tool that can protect the king. All three conditions must be met in order to do checkmate. Okay? Whoever managed to checkmate won the game. Also, there are several rules that regulate the matter of check. The player must not make a move so that his king is threatened by check. Okay, I've already explained you the rule. I will explain you again quickly. In this position, for example, the white is not allowed, if it is white's turn, the white is not in this position, for example, the white is not allowed to go to the square g2, because in g2 he will be threatened by the black queen. So if it is white's turn, the move king f1 to g2 is an illegal move. Okay, you are not allowed to move with your king to a place that is threatened by your opponent's tool. And when the king is in a check position, you must cross the check position to stop, if possible. Any other move in a check position is illegal. As I've already explained to you this point. Yes? In this is a check position. The black queen is threatening check of the white king. You are not allowed to move your pawn in a check position. You must eliminate the check position immediately. Any other move is illegal move. Any other move in a check position is illegal. If the opposing player is not paying attention to the check and makes an illegal move, his king must not be hit, and his attention must be drawn to the fact that he is threatened by check. So, for example, if the white did an illegal move in a check position, the illegal move, you must, if you're the black side, you must tell the white side that he is in a check position, and the illegal move is cancelled. You cancel the illegal move, and the white side must make another move in its place. So in this position, the white side can move his king to g1 or g2 or e1 or e2. Okay? Now I will talk about 4 types of check. Okay? Moving a piece so that it opens, moving a piece so that it threatens the opponent's king by itself is called direct check. So in this position, for example, if you move the queen from f5 to g4, you actually threaten a direct check on the white king. Why? Because if you threaten check by the tool that you moved, actually this type of check is a direct check. The moving tool is threatens check on the king. This is a direct check. Another example, in this position, if you move the black rook from e8 to d8, it threatens direct check. The tool that you moved, it is the tool that threatens the check. This is a direct check. Okay, the tool that you move itself threatens check on your opponent's king. This is a direct check. Okay. The second type of check is indirect check. Moving a piece so that it opens a line of attack for the piece standing behind it to face the opposing king is called indirect check. So when you move a tool and you expose your opponent's king to a threat of check by another tool, this type of check is called indirect check. For example, in this position, if you move the bishop from d7 to g4, you threaten indirect check by the black rook. So you moved the bishop and you threaten check by the rook. That is a direct check. Actually, you moved the bishop and you threatened exposed check, yes, by the rook. This is indirect check. So by moving the bishop, actually you expose the white king to the line of attack by the rook. Actually, in this position, the bishop blocks the line of the attack of the rook, so you moved the bishop in order to expose the white king to the line of the attack of the rook. Okay? You move the bishop and the rook was standing behind the bishop, and you expose the white king to the attack of check by the rook. This type of check is indirect check. Okay? The third type of check is the combination of direct check and indirect check in one move. A double check moving a piece so that it itself threatens the opponent's king and at the same time opens line of attack against the opponent's kings for the piece standing behind it, that is a combination of direct check and indirect check in one move. It's called double check. I will show you example. In this position, this is an example for double check. In this position, if it is black's turn and he moves his bishop from d7 to f5, by moving the bishop to f5, he actually threatens, the bishop threatens direct check on the king from one side, and also the rook also threatens check or indirect check on the white king. So you moved a piece and that piece threatens direct check and also expose the white king to indirect check. So it is a combination of direct check and indirect check that is called double check. Okay. A double check is exactly what it sounds like. A king is put in a check by two pieces with a single move. Double check almost always occurs when a discovered check or discovered attack happens, where one piece moves and exposes a new attack by previous blocked piece. So actually the rook, the black rook is blocked by the black bishop, and when you moved the bishop, you exposed the king you made an exposed check by the rook because he was blocked, and when you moved the bishop, you did a exposed check by the black rook and direct check by the knight itself, because he is the piece that moved and threatens also check to the white king. Okay, so it is a combination of direct check and indirect check that is called double check. Okay, and the third and the last type of check is called cross check. When a player responds to a king threat with counter check while blocking his opponent's check. So I will give you an example to cross check. In this position, if the black rook goes to a2, it does a check to the white king, and the white responds by moving his king to d1, and actually he escaped from one side. He escaped from the check of the black rook, and he himself threatens a check to the black king. Okay, so he responds to the threat of check of the black by counter check by the white bishop. So when you escape from a threat of check and at the same time you do a counter check to your opponent, so in one move, by escaping with your king, you actually create a counter check to your opponent's king. This check, this type of check is called direct check. So the black rook threatened check on the white king. The white moved his king and escaped from the check by the rook, and at the same time he created a counter check on the black king. Okay, so this is the fourth type of check that's called cross check. You, in a check position, you escape from the check from one side and create a counter check to your opponent's king. So the black threatens check to the white king. The white king escapes from the check and created a counter check to the black king. Okay, this is the counter check. Okay, thank you very much.